It's always a pleasure to come to Italy. It's always a pleasure to come to Cambabasso, I believe 4 times or 5 times here. It's always a pleasure to speak and to work with the colleagues here. It's not a pleasure to be the oldest in the room. Nevertheless, I should prefer to be a student today, and I should prefer to be in your place and not in my place with all the experience, more than 60 years in the world of legal law. Nevertheless, it's always a pleasure to meet you, and perhaps to be and to wish to you to be optimistic. We are in a bad position today. We are in trouble. We are in problem everywhere in the world. Nevertheless, I believe that for the young generation, it's fascinating to create, to innovate, and to, of course, to solve the problems that we don't solve in our generation. Therefore, some words before a Belgian joke, and a Belgian joke about management of public enterprise. What's the problem? 60 years ago, I was a lawyer, and 60 years ago, it was a Treaty of Rome. At that moment, neither in Cambabasso, neither in Rome, they invite other people, there are 6 states who formed the Treaty of Rome. It was not aware that China exists, or Russia exists, or even the United States, because I be a witness about that. I can trust you that the 6 states were sure in 10 or 20 years to be stronger than the United States. We believe at that moment we had the solution about the transnational economic relations. We should be sure that the 6 states would be the model in the world about the transnational, of course, economic relations. And therefore, it was a fascinating moment, also in the faculties. For instance, therefore, 5 years later, I was appointed for the first time in a new chair about economic law, transnational economic law. So, if you are a little fascinated by discovery, this memory, that at that moment we were sure that Europe would be once again a model in the world. I don't give any information for my mind and my witness and my, of course, advice about today. Nevertheless, let us take in account about public entities that at the moment of the treaty, in Italy like in Belgium, like everywhere, we say public entities would come to an end because free market and competition is for private agents. And so therefore all the treaty was mainly for the private sectors and the private agents about that. Nevertheless, we were aware that there must take some disposition just to allow some public entities to bring that over by private hands, or in certain sense to reduce their activities, because it was not the mind in the past that public entities were there in the common market to compete with other people. And therefore, at that moment, we were aware that everywhere private agents would take the economy. Time were done. After 10 years, after 20 years, we were fascinated by financial world. We were fascinated by the fact that public entities were necessary, that it was a starting point, not like today, that public entities in each country must be important to maintain some national interest. Therefore, once again, perhaps in 60 years, you will discuss about what means national interest. It would mean that in a certain sense. That would be perhaps for the next generation, but it is high time that we discuss about that. We must be happy all together and not by nations. We must be happy all together. Nevertheless, we said the economic world today are different than 60 years ago. And therefore, in my small country, in Belgium, we believe with the government, and I am involved with the Minister of Justice, to make, of course, two new codes. Last year, a code about economic law. And this year, in February, a new code about companies and associations. And the mind was to make an end with the big division in French law between private law and public law. And we said, of course, all the agents, private, public, are welcome in the market. If they are welcome in the market, they must, of course, be governed like You must be governed in a good sense and with, of course, open competition. And therefore, we try today that, of course, not to avoid and not to compete between public and private, but saying that there are rules about governance. There are rules about governance, and you know that in private sector, in private companies, more and more private idea, private management, private, of course, rules and ethics become more and more important. For the public entities, we are in a problem. My grandson shall give you a certain joke about a Belgian entity. But of course, the problem is this. How can a public entity today be really good governance, be good controlled, and of course, to be answered? They are the same person as the law. If a public entity wants a modification of the law, it's not difficult to obtain that. It, of course, they discuss between politicians and actors about economic law. It's easy to combine both. With public, of course, person from one side to the other. From the control, it's a little strange that, of course, they were controlled by the same persons as the public authorities. So they are involved. And so today the problem is, how can we do to have a better management in the public entities? And of course, to start for that, we are in Belgium, let us say, surprised. 2 or 3 years ago, perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, we discovered that the public entities make a good profit. They paid a lot of money to all people inside the company. But we were strange about this case. And we say, let us start in a public, of course, entities, control entities, and my grandson was a member of this control entity, to see what happens there, just to have some ideas to have better governance. Better governance of private, of public entities is perhaps the problem for your generation. And therefore, we must compete about that. And hopeless that we reduce, of course, lessons that we received today from the United States, tomorrow for another nation, pretending that they must do everything for their own and not for common welfare. So the Belgian joke is in the hand of my grandson.
Thank you, Guy. Well, first of all, thank you, Maria and Federico, for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be among you, of course. And I'll try to be as short as possible, since I know we are already a little bit late on the program. But I believe it's important to show you that when we put a subject, fair, accountable and controlled management of public entities, there are also cases that are absolutely not in line with those objectives. I worked on one of these cases. I was privileged to be working with renowned professors and experts in Belgium, and we wrote a report that was about 150 pages, if I recall correctly, and which was also presented to the region of Wallonia in Belgium, and which was also accompanied by another report that was made by a commission of the Senate. Actually, it was the first Senate commission that was implemented since 1992. So you can imagine the resonance of this case in Belgium. It made the big headlines for weeks. What, in the first instance, was because of the remuneration, the salary that the people were working in it were receiving, while actually they were not doing proper job. But the first idea that has to be put here is we are still in the economic crisis. The countries needs to make money. Of course, by the tax regulation, but also more and more by getting involved in the economy with their company. And sometimes it's not the state that is claiming there are not enough money to run the country, but it's also the local municipalities that are endangered because they are not receiving enough money that they are claiming from the state. And so what they do is they take initiatives. Actually, as I said, Belgium is a difficult country. It's a federal state, but it's turning more and more into a confederalist state. What I mean by that is the federal state is giving more and more power to the regions and to the communities, which are divided in two. You get the Flemish and the Wallonia, and then of course the capital from Brussels, who's struggling between both. And you get all these provinces, 11, and the municipalities, it's 589, if I'm correct. Those municipalities have been given the right to associate together to manage, well, municipalities' interests. Those are the distribution of electricity, the distribution of gas, managing of the municipal pool, and stuff. What they did not see coming is that municipalities were also able to take advantage of the proper legislation that was applicable to them in order to grow way bigger than they were supposed to be. The case I will present you publicly actually is coming from the province of Liège. It was an association of several municipalities, that were first of all merged to regarding the distribution of the electricity and the gas system. And then when they understand that there was a lot of money in the distribution of electricity and gas, they decided that they could do more with such money. And so they started to buy telecommunication companies, which was, of course, not reported in the press, neither to the people that elected them. And then they started to do even more. They started to buy press, they started to go into the insurance system, they started to go into the energy and to develop international activities. For instance, they entered into as a shareholder of a press company of France, the Nice Matin journal. They also started to propose the services to build hydraulic bridges in Congo. They started to make an affiliate company in Kenya. All this under, well, that intercommunale system, or intermunicipal association, which is, of course, not the first purpose of such company. What's important here is also to understand that normally an intermunicipal association is under the tutelarship of the region from which it is relevant, of course. Here it was the Walloon region, and as I said, this competence was supposed to be limited to municipal activities. There was also, of course, applicable rules, such as for the remuneration, since it was part of a public system. It was a public companies. But what they did is they started to create affiliate company, which allowed them to, well, escape from the regulation. First of all, of the remuneration limitation, because, you know, when you enter into competition, sometimes it's difficult to attract the right profile because they cost a lot of money, and public money can afford that. So that's a way to put it aside. And then, of course, there is the competence and the tutelarship. How to get rid of the region of Wallonia. That's having always a look on your company. And how to make sure when you enter in the competition that the information you will disclose to the administration board, which is of course composed by members of the municipality, won't go after to the press and say everything that they've heard, because confidentiality is of course one of the main concerns when you work in a competition firm. Well, there again, the affiliates was the solution. They took over the control of the company by making one firm under the other, and without letting know the municipalities of what was actually going in there. There was just giving the money that the municipalities were hoping, even though it was better than that. They were asking for a budget at the beginning of each year. And then the company had to manage to give enough profits so the municipalities would be satisfied. All of this, well, results in one big scandal. As I said, the first companies was the distribution of electricity and of gas who merged, and when that merger happened, well, what they had to do is, of course, to constitute a new board of administration. But what about the former members, who were, of course, elected people? Well, those were placed in high committees, supposed to be watching what was going on in the company, but also in the system. Well, you receive a remuneration, but you don't have to justify what you're doing for the company. So over 2 million of euros was spent in 3 years for 30 members who did almost nothing for the company. And that's how it went into the press at first. But as I said, working on this case with other professors and experts, we discovered that there was way bigger concern than that. Who's going to be responsible for the company that's effectively operating on the international field? Well, the municipalities actually don't have the real control of the company. It's just several people who's now giving the orders, not the communes. And even though when the scandal went out to the press, it has to be said that almost no measures were taken against this company. Because as I said, the tutelarship was given up, because they grow so big that the municipalities that were among this company were not only from the Walloon region, but also from Brussels and from the Flemish regions. So nobody actually had the control over this company. It went rogue. And it is still rogue. It has, of course, tried to comply a bit to some recommendation, but more or less, there's nothing that happened and that's changed. The company has still the French press in its division. Well, I don't see the municipal interest in this. This still applies for international activities, and I don't see either the relation with this. And nobody, I say nobody, is acting on this, while there is clear infringement of laws. And we are here in international relationship. So what can we do to improve the possibility to make the states and their company, even though here it's not a state company but a local company that's still coming from public money, to be accountable for those behavior? That's the main question we had to ask, and we indeed investigated several options that were discussed here, like the golden share, because the golden share was the right option for us in order for the region to keep power of this company. Another option that was discussed is for the region to buy back all the shares of the municipalities, but of course the region doesn't have the money to do so. And so actually it's all a political problem, because the politics doesn't want to take the right decision against one another, and so everything is stuck as long as one people will be able to bring this matter to court. Because in the end, as I said, for the moment it's all in the hands of the politics. Thank you.